Welcome to Relationship Mastery, a podcast for those who want to learn how to master the art of creating happy, healthy, and loving relationships. Please join me, Adey-Jones, and my co-host, Barry Selby, each Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific for a lively and informative conversation on everything to do with relationships. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is part 2 of our series on toxicity. We did masculine toxicities, I should say, last week. And this week we're going to do feminine toxicity. But as Barry likes to call it, it was the toxic machoism, not toxic masculine. So
yeah, and also I don't have a term that fits for the feminine side of the conversation, but certainly there are toxicities that women do and perpetuate, same as men do the same thing too. So we have to remove it from the feminine and masculine labels. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, exactly. And just to clarify again, this is not about being gender specific at all. These are just sort of what we would refer to as classic sort of masculine or macho traits and classic feminist. Oh God, I'm so determined to be a feminist.
Yeah, we don't get in trouble here with other certain people. So
exactly. But I thought it'd be fun. I mean, I can certainly talk about traits that classic, as I say, feminine traits that I see in myself that have veered to the unhealthy. But before I start divulging my stuff, I want Barry to share what, in his experience of dating, what he would classify as some behaviors that are hyper feminine, as in stereotypical, that he has experienced as either toxic or just not very helpful or healthy to the relationship.
Challenging is better way of putting it. Yeah. Where do I want to go with this? I mean, speaking from a personal experience, probably the best way to start. Exactly. Being totally transparent. What put me into this work was because of what happened in previous relationships with 3 particular women in a row, and where they were, to my eyes now looking back, actually out of alignment with their femininity. So it wasn't so much they were just feminine traits. It's more like they were exhibiting behaviors that were, I'm going to say unfeminine, but things that weren't lines of their feminine. And basically what it was is, in the cases of these relationships, and I definitely hold myself accountable for my part in the relationships. I'm not blaming them for any of this. But they basically ran the relationship. They became they took on the quote male energy, so to speak, in the partnership, even though we were a straight couple, man and woman. But the way that each one of them carried themselves, especially the last one in particular, because that was the most telling and the most waking me up type of thing. It was the most, what's what I'm looking for? I won't say provocative is the wrong word, but it certainly got my attention. That's probably a way of putting it. Is because she had been wanting me to keep taking charge, but she almost wanted me to overcome her way of doing things. It was almost like a one-upmanship going on. And it's, again, independent of gender and independence of polarity. And it was just a challenge because what I'm also aware of in other women I know, and especially with some clients, they've become, I don't want to say the word bossy in a way, but they've become so in charge because of the way they've had to live their lives, especially if they're in the business world and other things too, that they lost touch with being truly feminine. So I'm not sure if it's toxicity in the feminine sense. It's more about how they've been out of alignment, perhaps the best way of putting it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a little hard for me to identify with some of the behaviors that I consider sort of toxic in the feminine, but because I can be quite sort of masculine. So if I'm going to veer anyway, I'm going to veer towards the masculine, I think too. But one of the classic ones is when women cry, that they use their sort of emotional sort of sensitivity as something to control somebody else. That's a sort of I remember men saying to me, "Why don't you just cry?" It's like I'm used to women that sort of behave this way when they're upset. Whereas I know in me, when I get that fight or flight response, I don't go into the sort of, poor little me cry mode. I go into the fight mode, which is a bit more masculine. But a lot of women will go into that space of, if I cry, he'll back off and I will get my way. That to me and again, we're really treading on dangerous ground here. We're not saying that all females do this by any means. We're
No,
just talking
no way.
about classic terminology, whether it applies or not. But that's really what we're talking about. Is we're talking about behaviors in all relationships that are not healthy, and we just happen to be breaking them up into toxic masculinity and toxic femininity.
Buckets, yeah, absolutely.
But I
Um,
definitely say one of them is the collapsing into emotions and crying to manipulate. That's a huge one. I think also not allowing men to have their emotional feelings. Being, because a lot of women, it's a double-edged sword. Some women say, well, I want a man to be sensitive and emotional, but as soon as a man is sensitive and emotional, a lot of women panic and don't like it and try and shut it down because they have
yeah.
that fantasy that the man is all strong, all powerful, the daddy figure, always in charge. And so when he's not always in charge and he is vulnerable and sharing from a very open-hearted space, a lot of women don't own that they're panicking.
Hmm.
They will override and try and suppress their men's emotions because it frightens them. So that's another one I think is, and also just being sort of coy and manipulative, using their femininity, their sexuality in a way to again manipulate, to
Hmm.
to, to charm and attract and control. And I think it's particularly, this is my pet peeve, um, because of experience. I just feel that I really strongly believe in a sisterhood, in an absolute love for your fellow sister, and that you don't encroach on somebody else's relationship. More bluntly, do not have affairs with men that are in relationships, or women if you're not heterosexual, but just to respect the integrity of somebody else's relationship. And I think I've seen often women that are insecure, it builds their self-esteem to win over an unavailable man. And I
Hmm.
think that is something that is really, you've got to look at that. That is, there are plenty of single people and available people out there. And if you are using that, um, winning over an unavailable man to bolster your own ego, especially if there are children involved, I think you really need to look at that behavior.
Absolutely. The one of the things, and we talked about this last week as well with men, when it's ego driven, that's one of the clues that maybe you're off track. And that's the thing for this case for women who do that for that sort of ego boosting mode. Because men do it the same, but not through that path, but the same result is to feel better about themselves because they've got something over somebody else, which is a negative trait period, regardless of gender. But something I want to speak to back to the emotional piece. Definitely for us men, the permission to be vulnerable, to permission to actually be expressive of sadness or tears even is something that we weren't trained or allowed to have growing up. Most of us were raised in environments where basically, again, the terminology was like, you have to man up, you don't be a sissy, you're being a girl sort of thing. So that we were trained that way. So when a woman gives us permission, at least verbally, yet doesn't have the space to be comfortable holding that space for us to do that, it's very confusing for us as well. So it
Yeah.
isn't healthy on the conversation. And I want to speak to the back for women being overly emotive. There's a term I learned a long time ago called emotional flooding. And it's one of these terms that is really so graphic in a way. It's because it's basically when a woman who doesn't know how to navigate her own emotional states, because when a woman is in a femininity, emotions are part of the process, but there's something that are honorable and valid. But when a woman loses herself in her emotions, basically she lets herself get totally overwhelmed by them, then she becomes more toxic to those around her just by simply flooding them with that stuff. Because when a woman is emotionally flooding, it is for men sometimes very challenging to be around because we don't know what to do to deal with it. It's like being in the throes of a massive storm out in the ocean. It's like we're out of control and she's out of control. So having a sense of self within that, for women and for men, to know who we are within all the stuff that's going on around us, is probably the biggest gift we can give ourselves to grow and to be able to handle those sort of different challenges.
Yeah. And I just wanted to clarify something here too again. Um, this is not just, I'm not talking about just women like losing control emotionally to manipulate a man. It can be other women, it can be anything. I
Yes.
think society has given women permission to to sort of melt into a puddle of emotions that they haven't given men. They haven't given men that permission. But for women, it's always been okay to do that. So I'm just saying, I think, but men do it too, for sure. But I always think when people lose control over their emotions, I do air quotes around lose control, because I actually think that when you allow yourself to go into that space knowing that you're flooding the other people around you and you're actually doing it sort of, it's, I don't think it's always unconscious. It's just it's a way of controlling the outcome of a situation that you find
Yep.
highly charged. And so I think to be able to be responsible, you can have your feelings and you can talk about your feelings and you can talk about, I'm feeling really angry right now. I'm feeling really upset. I feel like crying right now. This is overwhelming me. But to articulate those feelings rather than have what you referred to last week, Barry, was a tantrum basically. And,
Yes.
and controlling the other person, whether it's a man or a woman, whoever, or a group or a family, by melting down all the time. And again, as I say, society has allowed that more in women than they have in men. Men tend to do it more in the sort of aggressive bullying way. That's their form of a tantrum. Women's
Mhm.
is to, become highly emotional and to melt down. But either way, it's a toxic behavior.
Well, it's interesting because I would shift the term allowed almost to expected.
Yeah.
That it's almost like if a woman doesn't emote, there's something quote wrong with her, which
Mm,
is like so. The expectation that we've had, unfortunately, had in our society for generations, we haven't, I think, in some ways grown out of that phase. So there is a certain expectation that's running around for how women should be and how men should be, which is why toxicity shows up, where we don't fit the paradigms anymore. And we're so, I think I'd like to think and hope and pray that we're evolving beyond those to a different and richer and more fulfilled way of being, both as men and women.
yeah.
Because
It's so
this,
interesting. You just used that word, you said expected, not just allowed. And initially, inside myself, I thought, well, I don't know, are we really expected? And I'm reflecting on a couple of relationships I've had with narcissistic men, and I remember they expected me to break down and cry. They were upset that their behavior wasn't eliciting that response in me. They were like, "What's
right,
wrong with you? You're supposed to sort of whimper and cry, and I feel masculine and powerful in this moment, and you're not doing that. You've
yeah,
robbed me of my feeling empowered over you right now." So it is,
exactly.
again, it's just that very unhealthy dynamic that can occur. The other one, well, share another one. You've got to think about it, Mary. Think about, and I know you said that some of the women that you had your greatest lessons were with women that were probably more comfortable in their masculine than their feminine. But have you witnessed women, you know, quote, use feminine wiles over you, or things like that? I mean, it could be even like sex. I mean, some women are accused of using sex as to manipulate men, their physical appearance to manipulate men. Have you had any of those encounters?
I'm not sure I want to tell any stories. However, definitely when I was a lot younger, I actually remember a vivid experience when I was turning 21 on the Reeperbahn in Hamburg, when I lived in Germany for a couple of years. And a woman basically, she wanted to use me as a means to get off because her, I found out afterwards, thankfully I didn't participate because I had an intuition, so it saved me, even at 21. But she basically wanted to get her rocks off because her boyfriend, who was in the military, was out of town for 3 months. And she was about the same age as I was. And she was gorgeous. But I felt something inside of me just said, "Don't." It's like shut me down. It stopped me from. I mean, stopped me functioning, frankly. But that did happen, so I definitely know what it feels like as a man to be on the receiving end of that stuff. And it's interesting because if it had been different circumstances, She was absolutely drop dead gorgeous. It would have been beautiful. It would be wonderful. It was great, wonderful. I've had women, how to say this term, provoke that in me to try and get in with me, because I'm in certain leadership roles, certain places over the years where women have sort of acted painfully, like bringing a sexual come on type thing, and it was totally. First, it was inappropriate. It wasn't in the right environment. I can't say anything else, but it felt so toxic. It
Mhm.
wasn't clean.
Yeah.
So yes, I've experienced that. Just to answer your question, I'm not saying any names. They're the innocent and the guilty.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna share a story that actually when you were just talking then I was thinking one too. I used to be I used to do I was a stylist and a costume designer, and I remember being on a set with a famous beautiful actress, no names mentioned, and she had this incredible seductive energy about her. And she was beautiful. But I noticed that it didn't matter whether you were male or female, she needed to seduce you. I mean, I don't mean like get you into bed to seduce you, but she needed to
No,
win you over. And she did
right,
it with a very sort of classic feminine wiles of sensuality and sexuality. And I remember I used to be going, oh my God, like she does it with everybody. It's like she really does it with everybody. But it again, it was I found it really off-putting because it was so manipulative again. It was it was a means to an end. She just wasn't comfortable in her own beauty and her own attractiveness. You
right,
saw it turned on and turned off, and so it's yeah, it's fascinating. And again, as I say, men can do this too. We're just generalizing here. But
right,
the other thing I did want to address, because I think a lot of women get accused of using sex to control their men, and I want to address that because I I think it is often a very toxic masculine thing to say to a woman. Sometimes women just aren't into sex because the energy is not right or there's something going on, and they have every right to say, I don't feel like making love with you tonight, or I don't feel like it because there's something going on in our communication, in the quality of the relationship, and they're not. So they're not withholding, they're not using sex to control in a negative way. They're genuinely, it's one of the areas that really illustrates that there are other things going on in the relationship or going that are undermining that sexual energy between two people. So
right.
have you ever felt that way in a relationship that a woman has used sex in that way to withhold, or what's your thoughts on that?
I'm just reflecting over my long history. Uh, in my intimate relationships, no, there hasn't been. I just double checking before I say that fully. I don't recall, I'll say that much, having that happen to me in intimate relationship. Again, I've had that experience of outside relationship where that energy's been put on and it was uncomfortable and it was toxic. Yes, but I'm grateful, I guess, in my relationships that hasn't been the case. So I think I escaped that one.
Oh, okay, that's great. Yeah, I got to fess up. I've had somebody accuse me of withholding and using sex to control, and it felt very dismissive, and which is interesting because that's that toxic masculinity we were talking about. Is to be dismissive of a woman's emotions. That's one of
Right,
the qualities. And when I look at the source, it was an unhealthy relationship. It was definitely with a narcissist, and so the whole relationship was unhealthy. And I knew that I was shutting down sexually because it was not a healthy relationship. I felt bullied, dominated, controlled, belittled, and all of that. So that's just, I was shutting down. It wasn't me going, oh, I'm pissed off with him, I'm going to not have sex with him. So,
right,
but I think that's something that that on the flip side of that too is that often sometimes women feel that their only value is their sexuality, and that they have to, you know, behave in that way even when they don't want to.
right.
They're actually what's the word I'm looking for? Dishonoring themselves when they think that they don't have a choice to say, you know what? this doesn't feel right for me tonight. There's something going on in our relationship. They feel that it's their role that they have to perform, whether they like it or not. And again, I think that's toxic femininity right then, not allowing yourself the permission to say what's right for you, what feels right to you.
Yeah. I there, there was something coming through. Hang on, see if it comes through again. This whole conversation we had the last two sessions about toxicity. I mean, the simplicity of what toxicity is something that's toxic to somebody else and to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if whoever's listening to this podcast, if you think to yourself anything you've done that has made yourself feel worse off, something from toxic behavior, or you wanted to do it to somebody else, this is the key, and this is the corner of this work: is you can turn the corner and actually understand that there's other ways of getting the results you want, and also find out what it is that's motivating that. Because maybe it's just simply you've defaulted to that because you didn't know any different, or
Mm-hmm.
because you're raised in an environment that made that happen. But you can come out of that place. You can elevate beyond it.
Yeah.
So I want to put it on the table too, because this conversation we had the last 2 weeks has definitely exemplified the behaviors we get into that are not healthy.
No, exactly. We could have just called it unhealthy behaviors in relationships.
True, yeah, absolutely.
But the other thing, again, I'm still on the sex thing here. um, but I have single friends that have over the years dated and thought that they've really led with their their sexuality. They
Hmm.
really have had low self-esteem, and they really thought that their only real value, or their initial um, currency even in a relationship, is their sexuality. And they will start off being very coy, flirtatious, sexual, and then they'll get into the relationship with the person, and then after a few months I hear them say, oh my god, all they want is sex. I mean, and I just want to say, but that's what you led with. That's, you attracted that type of person because that's what you thought your only currency was. But when we
Hmm.
enter into a relationship just being ourselves, being real, being authentic, we will attract a partner that knows what they're getting. But if we're
Yeah.
using sex to lure and to attract, and we're not showing our full self, then the person you may have attracted may only be interested in sex, actually. So you're changing the rules once you've got into a relationship with them, and then that unearths a lot of baggage and unhealthy behavior.
I was just reflecting on it's a long time ago now. I had a roommate, a housemate, who, when she was in her relationship, when the relationship was not going so well, she and I would get together. And then when the relationship was going again, we wouldn't be together. And it was just a sexual based thing. And that was the only thing going on between us. And it was definitely from the place that I don't think we saw each other beyond that place. It was like there was the only thing that kept us connected. So when that was gone, it was like there's nothing there.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely, one of the things I've talked about in my work a lot about the journey is that if you want to have a long term relationship, you need to be able to be friends with the person you're going to be with as well. But if you start with sex, usually that doesn't happen. So to spend the time getting to know somebody first before you bring sex into the picture, that's a whole different way of doing it for some people. Like you're saying, some people, that's all they do is lead with sex. So there's no depth to their connection beyond the physical act.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's there's room for improvement.
Moving on from sex now for a second. I think we need to do a whole show about sex, actually. I think we're going to get really
Oh, we do at least a couple of shows about that. Yes.
do most of the talking about that. No, I'm teasing. I got a lot to say about it too. I but the other one I'm going to talk about is some people I know have this. It could be a sort of generational thing to a degree, but not necessarily either. But that there is this expectation that women have of men to take care of them, that
Mm,
they're not, it's and I'm not saying any, I don't think everybody should be out in the world working. I think that in a relationship if you're in a relationship and somebody is, taking care of a home or taking care of children or anything like that, that is a job. That is a real job. I am not putting that down. But I'm talking
Right.
about there are some women I know that have this expectation that they really don't need to contribute anything to the relationship, and that men should just be there, to use that horrible, disgusting old term, but sugar daddy sort of type of thing. But they can
Right.
expect it from, I mean, when it's that contractual, then it's sort of, it's like, hey, that's the contract. I'm candy on your arm, and you take care of me because you're older or more financially stable or whatever. That's a contract. I'm not judging that by any means, but I think sometimes it's such a difficult. We've thrown the whole relationship and the roles thing so much in the air. Everybody's confused, and even me. I mean, I'm 64, but there's still a part of me that likes, you know, I love to take care of my man and cook dinners and things like that. But I also like to be taken out for dinner, and I like the car door opened. But I feel that we have a very equal relationship, and I will take him out for dinner too, and things like that. But it's there is something in that those roles that we were made, some of us of our generation anyway, were raised on, that can get confusing. I still have female friends I know who have the attitude of, I want to be taken care of. And I want to say, well, what are you doing? What's your what is taken care of mean, and what are you contributing?
Right.
And it doesn't
That's the.
mean financial. It means, just roles. So speak to that a little.
It's, that is definitely something that I've definitely had to grow through myself. And yes, we have. How can I put this? We definitely had the experience of the old-fashioned way of doing things in a relationship, where the man would lead, the woman would follow. But and maybe it's just my own journey myself. I've evolved so far beyond that. That definitely, yes, I look at masculine and feminine interaction relationship, having a beautiful dance and nuance the way they work together. And yes, the masculine leads the feminine, creates all these wonderful things to come together. But it's not like rigid in that structure. That's the thing. I guess the challenge is we have this. Some people carry this whole belief system. It's got to be this way and this way, and that's the way it's going to be. It's like, no, the whole thing about being in the masculine and feminine flow, which talked about last time, or time before last, about how we carry both, is there's got to be a freedom to move within all parts of that. So the man and the woman can change roles depending on what's going on. Because one of my favorite things, like if I'm in a relationship, is cooking together. It's not cooking for, we cook together. And that to me, that's not a masculine feminine thing. That's just a joint thing. So there are ways of being in a relationship that's still fun, joyful, fulfilling, creative, where you bring all of yourself to the relationship as your partner does as well. And
Yeah,
that's, I think, ideally where we want to get to in this conversation is about how do you bring all of yourself into a relationship that is healthy and whole, and your partner is as well. That would be ideal.
yeah. No, it's so true, and exactly. And when I say I love to, I mean, I'm just more of a cook than my partner, but he's a wonderful sous chef. He chops inside me, and he's a wonderful helper out to when we're cleaning up after cooking. So
Hmm.
it is that balance of both things. What I'm trying to say is that um, yeah, I think it's, again, we could have named this, as I said, just unhealthy expectations, unhealthy
Right.
manipulative behavior, unhealthy ways of being in a relationship that lead to a lack of respect for each other. So that doesn't mean that you can't still be a gentleman and still be a feminine
Exactly.
woman. It doesn't mean that one is above and one is below. It's just, as I love what you said, that beautiful dance that we have with each other, where we flow in and out of that masculine and feminine energy within ourselves and within our partner. But again, I think what I keep hitting on when I see myself talking here is when either, whether it's toxic masculinity or toxic femininity, when those behaviors are used to manipulate and control another person, that's when you know it's toxic.
That bottom lines it beautifully. Yes.
Great. All right then. Wonderful. So get ready for the next show, Barry. We're going to be talking sex. I want lots of
Sounds
stories.
good.
Amazing.
That's gonna bring people back.
Okay, we'll leave it at that then. Have a great week,
Yes.
everybody. Thank you.
Take care of yourselves. Bye.
Bye bye.
We trust you enjoyed this episode and invite you to share this with your friends and loved ones. In fact, please subscribe to our Relationship Mastery podcast. That way you'll get each new episode, fresh and shiny, as soon as it is released. We'd love to hear from you as well, so go ahead and enter your questions and comments at relationshipmastery.show. Take good care. We will connect with you in our next episode of Relationship Mastery.